Washington made a decision this week that could determine whether the Middle East tips into war or steps back from the edge. And the maddening part? The solution was already on the table, fully tested, internationally verified, ready to execute. And they said no. If you follow global power and want to understand what's actually moving underneath the headlines before the consequences become impossible to reverse, drop a like right now and keep watching, because what you're about to hear changes how you read everything else coming out of this region. Here is the number that defines this entire crisis: 450 kilograms. That is Iran's current stockpile of uranium enriched to 60% purity. Weapons grade sits at 90%. The technical bridge between where Iran stands today and a functional nuclear device is not measured in years or months. It is measured in weeks. Every back-channel conversation, every ceasefire framework, every carefully worded diplomatic statement since this conflict began ultimately collides with that single question. What happens to those 450 kilograms? That is the whole game. Not sanctions, not regional security guarantees, not diplomatic recognition. The uranium, just the uranium. And right now there is exactly one country offering a concrete operational mechanism to remove it. The same country Washington just refused to work with. Ask yourself why that refusal happened, and hold that question, because the answer will completely reframe how you understand this standoff. Russia stepped forward with a proposal that on paper resolves the core demand entirely. The offer is direct. Hand over the uranium. Russia physically removes it from Iranian territory, transports it to Russian storage, processes it into civilian nuclear fuel under full IAEA monitoring, and every step is internationally verified. No military escalation, no regional war, no face-losing unconditional surrender for Tehran. A clean, structured exit ramp. The United States' central demand, get the uranium out of Iran, is met completely. Iran preserves its nuclear infrastructure. The IAEA has a clear verification framework. Every box gets checked, and Washington said no. A U.S. official confirmed it to Axios without ambiguity. The offer, quote, has not been accepted. Now here is the part that stops you cold and demands a real answer. If a solution exists that satisfies the primary demand, prevents military conflict, and stabilizes the region, what possible logic leads to rejecting it? Stay with that question because the answer has absolutely nothing to do with uranium. The real conflict is not about whether the uranium leaves Iran. Both sides agree it must. The conflict is about who holds it after. Russia, through its state nuclear corporation Rosatom, already controls a significant share of global uranium enrichment and nuclear fuel supply. Multiple countries across Europe and Asia depend on Russian nuclear services for their energy infrastructure. Washington's calculation is this: if Russia takes Iran's enriched uranium and reintroduces it processed into the global nuclear fuel market, Moscow gains strategic leverage across the entire international energy system. For an administration working to reduce global dependence on Russian nuclear capacity, handing Moscow that kind of advantage feels like a structural defeat. That concern is not irrational. It is grounded in genuine strategic competition. But here is the cost of that calculation, and it needs to be stated plainly. By blocking Russia, Washington is insisting that Iran surrender its uranium through an alternative channel, a channel that does not exist. Iran will not hand this material directly to the United States. That is not a political opinion. That is a strategic certainty. It will not entrust it to American allies either. And destroying the uranium inside Iran would require a level of mutual trust between Washington and Tehran that simply does not exist. So what you are left with is a contradiction that defines this entire crisis. America wants the uranium gone. Russia offers the only proven mechanism to remove it. Iran is willing to engage with that mechanism, and because of who controls the solution, not what it actually achieves, the deal stalls. Before you keep watching, if you want this kind of daily breakdown of what's actually driving global events beneath the surface, subscribe now. This is exactly what this channel is built for. Now here is the detail that should settle any remaining doubt about whether the Russian proposal is credible, because this is not a theoretical framework. It is not an untested diplomatic concept being floated for the first time. This is a direct replay of something that already happened, already worked, and was already certified by the international community. Under the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, Russia performed precisely this function. Iran shipped out approximately 97% of its entire enriched uranium stockpile. The destination was Russia. Rosatom received it, stored it on Russian territory, processed it under internationally verified conditions, and the IAEA confirmed compliance for 3 consecutive years. No significant violations, no diversion of material, no breakdown in oversight. The system functioned exactly as designed until the United States walked away from the agreement in 2018 and reimposed sanctions, dismantling the entire framework in the process. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov stated publicly that Russia is the only country with positive, documented experience handling Iran's enriched uranium. That is not diplomatic posturing. It is a verifiable fact backed by 3 years of IAEA verification reports. The infrastructure still exists. Rosatom retains the technical capability, the legal framework, the physical storage facilities, and the established working relationship with the IAEA to execute this arrangement again almost immediately. Which means the honest question is not whether this can be done. The honest question is why the one country with a proven track record is being told it cannot participate in the solution. Watch what Iran does next, because this is where the strategic picture becomes impossible to misread. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi boards a plane and flies directly to St. Petersburg to meet face-to-face with Vladimir Putin. Foreign ministers do not fly to meet heads of state for routine check-ins. This is a deliberate, visible, public signal sent at a moment of maximum diplomatic pressure. Before departing, Araghchi describes the visit to Iranian state media as a valuable opportunity for consultations, emphasizing these discussions are particularly important at this stage. That phrase, "at this stage," is not casual language. It signals urgency, deliberate timing, and leverage. Iran is communicating something without stating it directly. If America will not accept Russia as part of the solution, we will engage Russia directly, regardless. And the Kremlin's response through Peskov makes the picture even clearer. Russia confirms the uranium custody offer remains active, standing, and available. Iran is not flying to St. Petersburg to ask for help. Iran is flying to St. Petersburg to stand next to the solution that already exists and make absolutely certain Washington understands the choice it has made. And if you think that visit is the only move Iran made this week, you're about to find out it was only half of it. The Strait of Hormuz is not a side detail in this calculation. It is leverage. Iran's ability to restrict passage through that choke point gives Tehran influence that extends far beyond its own borders. Every American ally dependent on Gulf energy flows has direct exposure. Every disruption to Hormuz shipping ripples through global oil markets, elevates energy costs, and puts pressure on Washington from directions that have nothing to do with Iran directly. Tehran understands this completely. By visibly deepening its engagement with Russia while the uranium question remains unresolved, Iran is ensuring the cost of Washington's hesitation stays visible to every government watching. Now add China, because what Beijing is not saying today is just as strategically significant as everything Moscow is saying publicly. Before Araghchi boarded his flight to St. Petersburg, he placed a call to Wang Yi. That conversation happened before consultations with any other regional players. Think carefully about what that sequencing tells you. China had early visibility into Iran's strategic thinking before the rest of the world understood what was in motion. And yet Beijing has maintained complete public silence. No statements on the St. Petersburg visit, no reaction to the uranium custody proposal, no visible positioning of any kind. But silence is not absence. It is strategy. Just 3 days before Araghchi landed in St. Petersburg, China and Russia held joint discussions with the IAEA specifically focused on Iran's nuclear program. That meeting took place on April 24th. 3 days later, Iran's foreign minister is sitting with Putin. That sequence is not coincidental. It points directly to coordination, prior alignment, and deliberate preparation before visible action. What you are watching is a layered process with distinct phases. The IAEA meeting represents the coordination phase. The St. Petersburg visit represents the execution phase. And China is operating from a position of quiet strategic strength throughout, sustaining Iran economically through long-term energy arrangements that give Tehran breathing room regardless of Western sanctions, removing urgency from Iran's decision-making while steadily increasing the cost of Washington's hesitation. Now, the counter-argument deserves direct engagement because it is real. Vladimir Putin is not taking Iran's uranium out of goodwill. He is doing it because it advances concrete Russian interests. It strengthens Rosatom's position in the global nuclear fuel supply chain. It embeds Russia as an indispensable actor in any post-conflict Middle East framework. It gives Moscow long-term custodial influence over one of the most sensitive strategic assets in the region. These are genuine gains, and Washington's reluctance is grounded in real strategic logic, not paranoia. But here is the question that counterargument cannot answer cleanly. Not whether Russia benefits, it clearly does, but whether the alternative to this arrangement produces a better outcome. Because the alternative is not a cleaner solution. The alternative is exactly what is happening right now: a conflict without resolution, a ceasefire that exists more on paper than in practice, mounting pressure across critical maritime corridors, oil prices elevated in ways that land directly on ordinary consumers, and 450 kilograms of enriched uranium still sitting inside Iran, unchanged, unresolved, growing more central to this crisis with every passing day. When you hold those two outcomes side by side, the cost of rejecting the Russian mechanism begins to look considerably heavier than the strategic benefit of denying Moscow additional influence. Here is what is likely happening right now behind closed doors in St. Petersburg. The discussion is not whether Russia takes the uranium. That question has been answered in principle. What is being refined is the specific framework, defined timelines for physical transfer, storage, and processing conditions, a structured IAEA verification protocol, and most critically, explicit binding limitations on what Russia can do with the material once it has custody. That last element is the precise point where Washington's objection lives. If the proposal coming out of these discussions includes genuinely binding, verifiable constraints on Russian use of the material, the core of Washington's objection is, at minimum, partially addressed. From there, the process follows a predictable path. Arachi carries the framework back to Tehran. It moves through intermediaries. It arrives back on Washington's desk, and at that point, the decision becomes unavoidable. Accept the mechanism or reject it a second time. If accepted, the implications are immediate and significant. The uranium question, what Trump himself called 99% of the deal, is resolved. Pressure on global shipping corridors eases. The pathway to ending this conflict opens in a way it has not been opened before. But if it is rejected again, the diplomatic record begins to tell a very specific story. Iran demonstrated willingness. Russia provided a tested and proven mechanism. The United States declined twice. That narrative shapes alliances, influences how the international community assigns responsibility, and frames every future negotiation in this region for years to come. Iran did not make just one move this week. It made two simultaneously. Through Pakistani intermediaries, Tehran presented Washington with a separate proposal: reopen the Strait of Hormuz immediately, stabilize global energy markets, give America and its allies a concrete, visible win right now, and address the nuclear question separately when political conditions allow. A fast relief option, a way to reduce pressure, demonstrate good faith, and create space for the harder conversation. At the same time, Iran sent its foreign minister to Moscow to reinforce the structural solution. The uranium pathway already exists, is already operational, and is already waiting. Two moves in 1 week, one to stop the bleeding immediately, one to resolve the core issue when Washington is ready. The United States took neither. Instead, the response was to pull back, cancel engagement, and issue an instruction to make a phone call. On one side of this standoff, Iran is holding two separate doors open simultaneously. On the other, Washington has not walked through either one. So look at the full picture of where this stands. Russia is holding the structural solution in St. Petersburg. Pakistan is carrying a separate proposal. China is quietly sustaining Iran's economic capacity from Beijing, and the United States is waiting for a different answer to appear, one that does not currently exist. Donald Trump said the uranium issue is 99% of the deal. He was right. And right now, the only mechanism capable of resolving that 99% is sitting in a room in Russia, fully operational, historically verified, and waiting for Washington to change its answer. The solution was never missing. It was never hard to find. It was rejected. And that single word, rejected, is the entire story of where this crisis stands today. We break this down daily before the consequences are impossible to ignore. If this gave you a clearer picture of what's actually happening, share it with someone who needs to understand it. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is the right time. Hit that button. This is the kind of analysis you won't find buried in a headline.